The torrential rain apocalypse has arrived. I awakened the power of telekinetic creation. While the city was submerged by floods, I made my house rise higher, floor by floor. This is Jiangzi Tangtang. Here comes a hardcore apocalyptic story. Su Jiu woke up from extreme thirst. He opened his eyes. The room was dim, with only a sliver of light coming through the window. It was still raining. He had been listening to this overwhelming sound for 9 days. His initial anxiety had turned into numbness. Su Jiu walked to the window and lifted a corner of the curtain. The dark clouds were pressing extremely low, as if they could collapse at any moment. He lived on the 6th floor, which was the top floor of this building. From this height, just 3 days ago, he could still see the opposite rooftops and the street. But looking down now, the murky floodwater had almost submerged the 2nd floor. Su Jiu dropped the curtain and turned to the kitchen. The water supply was cut off on the 3rd day. At that time, he had filled every available container with water, but as 6 days passed, even the largest reserves would eventually run out. He picked up his last bottle of mineral water, shook it, and saw there was less than half left. He took 2 sips to moisten his throat, opened a packet of pickled mustard greens, and ate it with half a bowl of cold rice. He covered the rest. This was his final ration. Su Jiu leaned against the kitchen doorframe, staring expressionlessly at the heavy rain outside. He was 24 years old this year, living alone in the city. No family, and no deep social connections. He majored in architectural design in college. After graduation, he found a job here as an interior designer. Having worked for 2 years, he didn't have much savings or many friends. His life was as plain as a glass of boiled water. The problem now was, he was about to starve to death. He had to find a way to go out and scavenge for supplies. In the early days of the rainstorm, he had risked going downstairs to see if he could find anything in the ground floor shops. He waded through waist-deep water to get in, but only found a few damp packets of instant noodles and 2 bottles of mineral water. He also almost tripped over something unknown in the water. After that, the water level kept rising, and he never went out again. He desperately needed food and water now, and a house that wouldn't be flooded. The idea sounded absurd, but he had already experienced something even more absurd 3 days ago. The rain that day was exceptionally heavy. The entire building was shaking. He curled up under his blanket, listening to the terrifying groans of the concrete structure, thinking the building was going to collapse. Then, he felt an indescribable, bizarre sensation. It felt as if an extra nerve had suddenly grown in his brain, connecting to something massive. He closed his eyes and realized he could see the structure of this building. The load-bearing walls, beams, pillars, the layout of the rebars, the thickness of the concrete. Every single detail appeared like a 3D blueprint, rendered in his mind. What was even more bizarre was that he could feel that several structural nodes in this building were nearing their load-bearing limits. If the floodwaters continued to wash against it for a while, it would most likely collapse. Then, he attempted something crazy. He imagined the exterior wall of the 6th floor, extending outward by 2 meters, to form a balcony. In the next second, as if molded by an invisible hand, the concrete began to grow from the surface of the wall, slowly extending outward. 2 minutes later, a brand new balcony appeared right before his eyes. Su Jiu was stunned. It took him a long time to accept this reality. Then, he spent the entire night experimenting. He discovered that as long as he focused his mind, he could, within his line of sight, create or modify any solid object out of thin air. Cement, bricks, stones, metal, glass. He could even extract raw materials from underground. He tried building a small flower bed on the balcony, and then tried reinforcing the entire building's load-bearing structure. Both succeeded, but the cost was also heavy. After using his ability, he felt severe headaches and extreme fatigue. That night, he practically crawled back to his bedroom on the floor. He slept for a full 20 hours before he recovered. Since then, he hadn't used his ability again. He was afraid that if he used it too frequently, he might cause himself a cerebral hemorrhage. Besides, he wasn't sure exactly how it worked, or if there were any other side effects. But now, there was no other choice. Zhu Jiu put on a waterproof jacket, tied his trouser legs tightly, threw on a raincoat, and found a large travel backpack. He stuffed a few empty plastic bags inside, dug out a fruit knife, and slid it into the side pocket of the backpack. He walked out onto the balcony. Rainwater hit his face, freezing cold. Zhu Jiu closed his eyes, channeling that power in his mind. He needed a small boat. It didn't need to be too big, but it had to be sturdy. He rapidly sketched a blueprint in his mind. The boat is 3 meters long, 1.2 meters wide, with a thickness of 3 centimeters. That's enough. The bow is slightly raised to reduce resistance. Leave a slot at the stern, where a long oar can be attached. Next is the canopy, an arched height just enough for him to sit up straight. The front edge extending 20 centimeters past the bow, to prevent rain from pouring in. The sides are semi-open, for easier rowing and observation. Diversion grooves are needed on the canopy roof, to let rainwater flow down the sides. The hull and the canopy are molded as a single piece, seamless and tight. This visualization process was much more effortless than actual building. 10 minutes later, the hull took shape. A small boat with a gray rain canopy was hovering outside the balcony. Zhu Jiu opened his eyes. A fine layer of sweat had already seeped out on his forehead. He looked at the small boat in front of him, a surge of satisfaction welling up in his heart. The hull was grayish-white, its surface still gleaming with moisture, but it was already hard enough. Zhu Jiu used his power to levitate the boat and sent it outward. The boat landed steadily on the water, splashing a small spray. It rocked a few times, then stabilized. Zhu Jiu breathed a sigh of relief. Using his power, he created a set of stairs on the outside of the balcony, extending step by step down to the water's surface. He climbed down the stairs. Reaching the bottom step, he carefully stepped into the boat. The rain was heavy, and visibility was poor, but Zhu Jiu was too familiar with this area. He had lived on this street for 2 years. Which shop was located where? He could find them even with his eyes closed. The nearest large supermarket was Wanjiafu Supermarket at the intersection. It was the largest supermarket in this vicinity, and the closest place for supplies. It was Wanjiafu Supermarket at the intersection. It was a 3-story commercial building. The first floor housed clothing stores and restaurants. The second and third floors were the supermarket. The food section was on the 3rd floor. He rowed the boat, navigating through the submerged streets. The surrounding scenery made his heart tighten. Only the crowns of the roadside trees were visible. Only the spherical tops of the streetlights remained, floating on the water. A damp, putrid smell filled the air. like rotting wood mixed with the stench of silt. Su Jiu frowned and rode faster. 10 minutes later, he saw Wanjiafu's supermarket. That grayish-white building stood above the water. Su Jiu rowed the boat to a window on the 3rd floor. The window was about 1 meter above the water level. He stood up, grabbed the windowsill, pushed himself up, and vaulted inside. Su Jiu's feet hit the floor, splashing a thin layer of water. A shallow layer of water had pooled on the 3rd floor ground. Fortunately, it wasn't deep, just barely covering the soles of his shoes. He steadied himself, took out the fruit knife from his backpack's side pocket, and gripped it tightly. The 3rd floor of the supermarket was a mess. Shelves were toppled, askew, and goods were scattered everywhere. He lightened his footsteps, sticking to the wall as he moved inward, bypassing several fallen shelves. There were a few crushed packets of instant noodles on the floor, along with a few empty cans. He crouched down to take a look. The edges of the cans were clean cut. They were pried open with a tool. Someone had been here, and more than one person. Su Jiu's nerves tensed up. He pricked up his ears. Except for the rain, there were no other sounds. He continued heading deeper inside. The shelves in the food section were mostly empty. But Su Jiu didn't give up. He bent over, carefully searching the corners. Luck was on his side. In a cabinet behind the checkout counter, he found 2 unopened bottles of mineral water. And in a corner, he discovered a box of compressed biscuits buried under other goods. He shoved the water into his backpack, tore open the box of compressed biscuits, and loaded them in packet by packet. The warehouse was at the very back of the supermarket. The door was locked. Su Jiu tested the doorknob. It wouldn't budge. He took a deep breath, lifted his leg, and kicked right at the lock. With a loud bang, the door popped open. Inside the warehouse were stacked full boxes of goods. It was a treasure trove, but his backpack couldn't hold any more. Su Jiu gritted his teeth, deciding to just take what he needed first. Right at that moment, he heard a noise. The sound of oars splashing water. And it was very close, right below the supermarket. Su Jiu put down the box in his hands, walked briskly to the warehouse door, pressed himself against the wall, and peeked out. Outside a window on the other side of the 3rd floor, an inflatable rubber dinghy was slowly approaching. There were 4 people on the boat, 3 men and 1 woman, all wearing raincoats. The rubber dinghy was piled high with items, as if they had just finished looting elsewhere and came here to try their luck. Su Jiu's heart pounded wildly. He quickly retreated back into the warehouse, gently pulling the door shut behind him. With the fruit knife tightly in his hand, his palms were sweating. Those 4 people climbed into the 3rd floor one by one. Split up and search quickly. It's getting dark. The leader's voice was deep. Footsteps scattered in different directions. Su Jiu hid inside the warehouse, holding his breath, motionless. The food section is basically empty. It's been cleaned out. One person shouted. Check the warehouse, the leader ordered. Footsteps approached the direction of the warehouse. The warehouse door was pushed open. Holy shit, we hit the jackpot! A young man's voice yelled excitedly. All 4 of them rushed into the warehouse. Su Jiu was in the deepest corner behind the shelves. He curled up, shrinking his body as much as possible, holding his breath. "Hurry up and move this. Load it onto the boat first," the leader said. The 4 people started carrying things out. Su Jiu hid behind the door, not daring to make a sound. They moved things for about 10 minutes. More than half of the supplies in the warehouse were gone. After the 4 completed their final trip, the leader stood at the door. "The boat is full. Let's head back first." The footsteps faded away. Su Jiu stayed crouched behind the door for another 5 minutes. Only after confirming they weren't coming back did he slowly stand up. He walked to the warehouse door and glanced outside. The 3rd floor was empty. Those 4 had already left. Su Jiu decided to take only the essentials: 2 cases of mineral water, 1 box of instant noodles, and 1 box of canned luncheon meat. He used a rope to tie the boxes together and took them into trips. First, he lowered the items down, placing them in the boat. Then he vaulted out and stepped into the boat. He did the whole process very quickly. The oars cut through the water, and he rowed towards his apartment building without looking back. By the time he returned to his building, the sky had turned completely dark. He climbed up along the stairs and moved the supplies inside piece by piece. Su Jiu tied the boat to the stairs. After carrying the last case of water inside, he leaned against the doorframe to catch his breath. This trip today had taken too huge a toll on him. All the way back from the supermarket, he had been forcing himself to row. His temples throbbed as if being jabbed with an awl. He twisted open a bottle of water, took a few gulps, opened a can of luncheon meat, and scooped 2 spoonfuls into his mouth. With food in his stomach, he regained some strength, but his head still ached. Just as Su Jiu was about to go rest in his room, he suddenly heard a noise from the stairwell. His nerves instantly tensed up. He walked softly to the door, listening closely. Footsteps echoed from downstairs, heavy and slow, interspersed with the sound of suitcase wheels bumping against the steps. Su Jiu opened the door just a crack to look out. The stairwell was dim, illuminated only by a faint light through the hallway window. A silhouette, dragging a suitcase and a large backpack, was struggling to climb up. The person was bent over, hair plastered to the face, making her features unreadable, but from the figure, he could tell it was a young woman. She stopped at the landing between the 5th and 6th floors, panted for a few breaths, and looked up. Su Jiu recognized her. Lin Zhaoyu, the neighbor who lived on the 3rd floor. Su Jiu's impression of Lin Zhaoyu was very blurry. They had exchanged a few words downstairs when picking up packages. He knew she was a nurse at the city hospital, living alone. That was it. This old residential building had 6 floors in total, 2 units per floor. But before the rainstorm, less than 6 units were occupied. The old couple in 401 on the 4th floor were picked up by their son's car on the 2nd day. The young couple in 302 on the 3rd floor risked driving away on the 3rd day and never returned. They probably made it out. Unit 201 on the 2nd floor was vacant. Nobody had lived there for a while. As for the 2 units on the 1st floor, he never saw anyone come out. There was a family of 3 on the 4th floor. On the 5th day of the rainstorm, they made a raft out of doors and plastic buckets, trying to row away. The raft capsized before even leaving the community. He had watched from his balcony. powerless to do anything. As for the other units, some had moved out long ago, leaving the apartments empty. Others had gone silent early in the storm. Right now, in this entire building, he and Lin Zhaoyu from the third floor were probably the only ones left alive. Su Jiu pushed the door open slightly wider. Lin Zhaoyu looked up, and her eyes met Su Jiu, who was standing at his sixth-floor doorway, half his face showing through the cracked door. They locked eyes for a second. Lin Zhaoyu spoke first, her voice hoarse. Su Jiu, you're still alive. Su Jiu didn't speak. He just watched her drag her suitcase and backpack up the final flight of stairs. Lin Zhaoyu stopped in the corner of the sixth-floor hallway, put her things down, dug out a waterproof tarp from her backpack, laid it on the floor, and then took a thin blanket from her suitcase. She sat down in the corner. She didn't proactively ask to enter Su Jiu's room. She just sat there quietly, her head down, as if trying to gather some strength. Su Jiu leaned against his doorframe, watching her for a few seconds. The water had already submerged the second floor, and was almost reaching the third. It made sense that Lin Zhaoyu would move up from the third floor. Su Jiu turned back into his room and closed the door. He sat on the sofa, placed the fruit knife within reach, and closed his eyes to rest. He didn't fully trust Lin Zhaoyu. In this apocalyptic world, trust was a luxury. But Lin Zhaoyu's behavior so far didn't make him feel threatened. He would observe her first. Half an hour later, Su Jiu opened his eyes, walked to the door, and took a glance outside. Lin Zhaoyu was still sitting in the corner. She was holding a bun, breaking it into tiny pieces and eating it slowly. Su Jiu noticed her backpack was bulging. She probably had some supplies in there. A few minutes later, Lin Zhaoyu picked up her empty backpack and headed down the stairs. Su Jiu went back inside to continue organizing his own supplies, keeping his ears pricked. More than 10 minutes later, footsteps echoed again. This time they were heavier, slower, step by step. Obviously, she was carrying a lot of things. Lin Zhaoyu appeared at the sixth-floor landing. The backpack on her back was stuffed full, and she was lugging 2 large shopping bags in her hands. Her forehead was covered in sweat. Her face flushed red. She put the things down in the corner of the hallway, panted heavily, then turned around and went down again. A second trip. A third trip. By the time she came up for the fourth trip, Lin Zhaoyu's legs were trembling. Her backpack was stuffed with thick coats and sweaters, and she was carrying a large bundle tied up with a bedsheet. It looked bulky, likely filled with bedding and blankets. Su Jiu leaned against his doorframe, watching her run back and forth 4 times, before finally speaking. How much more is there? Lin Zhaoyu dropped the bundle, hands on her hips, gasping for air. That's about it. I grabbed everything I could. Also some dry goods and canned food. I moved up everything I hoarded before. She pointed at the large pile, stacked in the corner of the hallway. 4 large backpacks, 3 shopping bags, 2 bedsheet bundles, plus the initial suitcase. Lin Zhaoyu dug out a pack of biscuits. Do you want some? The corners of Su Jiu's mouth twitched slightly. He shook his head. Are you going out to find supplies again tomorrow? Can you take me with you? Lin Zhaoyu asked. Obviously, when he had gone out for supplies earlier, Lin Zhaoyu had seen him. Lin Zhaoyu's tone was very calm. I'm familiar with this area. I know where the medicines are. I studied nursing. I can treat wounds. I won't take advantage of you for free. Su Jiu leaned against the doorframe, looking at her. Tomorrow morning at 6. Okay. Su Jiu closed the door, went back to the sofa and lay down. The headache was still there, but his mind was already calculating tomorrow's route. Wanjiafu supermarket had already been swept once. Not many supplies were left. Lin Zhaoyu said she knew where to find medicine. In an apocalypse, medicine is also a scarce resource. Taking her along might not be a bad deal. Su Jiu rolled over, closed his eyes. The next morning at M. When Su Jiu opened the door, Lin Zhaoyu was already standing in the hallway. Her backpack was packed. Her raincoat was on. The pile of supplies from last night had been reorganized. Food and medicine were stacked separately on one side. Clothes and bedding were neatly folded, covered with a plastic sheet to prevent moisture. Morning, Lin Zhaoyu said. Su Jiu glanced at her, then glanced at the neatly stacked supplies in the corner. You moved all this up here. Aren't you afraid I'll rob you? Su Jiu asked. Lin Zhaoyu was taken aback for a moment, and then she smiled. If you wanted to rob me, you would have done it last night. Su Jiu didn't say anything more. He turned and walked towards the balcony. They climbed down the stairs. When Lin Zhaoyu saw the small boat, she didn't make a fuss. She just simply said, "Did you make this yourself?" Impressive. The two got onto the boat, and the small boat cut through the water. Where to? Su Jiu asked. To the community health service station. Lin Zhaoyu said. It's on the second floor of a 4-story building in the east of the city. Su Jiu looked at her. The second floor? Isn't the water already flooding the third floor? It's flooded in our area. Lin Zhaoyu pointed to the east. The terrain in the east is higher. There's a long uphill slope on that road. The top of the slope is nearly 2 stories, higher than the foundation of our building. The health station is right at the top of the slope. Its second floor is equivalent to our 4th floor here. Su Jiu thought about it and understood. Moreover, that station mainly handles public health and vaccinations. So there are fewer patients. The medicine inventory is larger than regular clinics, but not many people know about it. Lin Zhaoyu added. Su Jiu didn't ask further and steered the boat eastward. Lin Zhaoyu sat at the stern, giving directions. The rain was heavy, making visibility poor. But she was indeed very familiar with this area. An hour later, the two reached the top of that long slope. The community health service station was a grayish-white 4-story building, built next to a small plaza. The water had only flooded up to the roof of the 1st floor. The 2nd floor housed the general clinic, the pharmacy, and the treatment room. The hallway was very quiet. Lin Zhaoyu walked briskly toward the pharmacy. The door to the pharmacy was locked. Su Jiu stepped forward, placing his hand on the rolling shutter door. He closed his eyes, channeling his power. The metal structure of the shutter door clearly appeared in his consciousness. With a thought, the internal structure of the lock core shifted silently. The springs popped open, and the shutter door automatically rolled up. The two walked into the pharmacy, took plastic bags from their backpacks, and began stuffing medicines inside. Once the backpacks were full, Lin Xiaoyu stood up. There are still some medical supplies in the treatment room. I'll go get them. The two then searched the treatment room and the prep room, packing all usable medical supplies into their backpacks. When they returned to the apartment building, Su Jiu noticed the water level had risen a bit more. At this rate, it would flood the third floor in a few days. By the time they moved the medicines and supplies upstairs, it was already afternoon. They divided the supplies. Lin Xiaoyu spread out her tarp in the hallway and began sorting them. Su Jiu sat on the sofa, listening to the rustling sounds of Lin Xiaoyu organizing things in the hallway. He thought it over in his mind. The hallway was no place for a person to live. The concrete floor was freezing. The dampness was heavy, and the night wind blew up the stairwell. A thin blanket was nowhere near enough. Besides, the apartment opposite his was just sitting empty anyway. Su Jiu opened his door, walked to the apartment opposite his, and placed his hand on the door lock. He closed his eyes, channeling his power. The internal structure of the lock clearly appeared in his consciousness. The lock clicked open, he pushed the door, and a rush of stale air poured out. The room was very dark. The curtains were drawn, but fortunately, it was fully furnished. You live here? Su Jiu turned around, looking at Lin Xiaoyu. Lin Xiaoyu, crouching in the hallway, still holding a plastic bag in her hands, froze. The hallway is no place to stay. This apartment has been empty. You can stay here for now. Lin Xiaoyu opened her mouth to speak, but just watched Su Jiu's back disappear behind the door of 601. She swallowed the thank you she was about to say. An hour later, Lin Xiaoyu had finished cleaning up 602. She stood in the middle of the living room, looked around, and suddenly felt a stinging in her eyes. She blinked hard a few times, forcing the tears back down. Then she walked to the door of 602 and knocked on it. Su Jiu opened the door, still holding a piece of compressed biscuit he was munching on. Is this all you're eating? Lin Xiaoyu glanced at the compressed biscuit in his hand and frowned. Wait a minute. She turned back to her room and dug out her small alcohol stove, a small steel pot, 2 packs of instant noodles, and a sausage. The alcohol stove was only palm-sized, an outdoor gear item she had bought for camping previously. She hadn't been willing to use it since the rainstorm started. When the water boiled, Lin Xiaoyu put the noodle blocks in, tossed in sliced sausage, and added a packet of pickled mustard greens. 3 minutes later, the noodles were done. She served half of it into a bowl and handed it to Su Jiu. Stop eating only compressed biscuits. It will ruin your stomach. Su Jiu took it. They each held a bowl. One stood at the door of 602, and the other squatted at the door of 601, eating noodles across the hallway. The next morning at M, the two set off on time. We're going a bit further today, Lin Xiaoyu said before getting on the boat. I know there's a big mall in the north of the city. The first basement floor is a supermarket, and there are 5 floors above ground. There's an outdoor equipment store on the 4th floor. The terrain there is high. Su Jiu glanced at her. How far? If we row. About an hour and a half. Su Jiu didn't hesitate. The oar sliced into the water, and the small boat headed north. The rain battered the canopy, making a muffled drumming sound. 40 minutes later, they encountered their first boat. It was a wooden raft, made out of doors and plastic buckets. A family of 3 sat on it. The man was paddling. The woman was wrapping a little boy in a plastic sheet. All 3 were completely soaked. Their lips were purple. Their faces ashen. The wooden raft and Zhu Jiu's small boat met head-on at the entrance of a narrow alley. The man stopped paddling, watching them with extreme wariness. Zhu Jiu didn't slow down, gliding past the wooden raft. As the 2 vessels passed each other, he heard the boy whisper, "Mom, I'm cold." The woman hugged him tighter. She didn't say a word. Lin Zhaoyu looked back for a moment, then turned around and met Zhu Jiu's gaze. Zhu Jiu shook his head. Lin Zhaoyu didn't speak, and she didn't look back again. Another 20 minutes passed. They passed a half-submerged residential building. A head poked out from a 4th-floor window. It was a young man. He yelled at them, "Hey! Do you have any food? Give me some food." Zhu Jiu didn't stop. "Hey! I'll trade you things for it," Lin Zhaoyu said in a low voice. "Don't stop." Of course, Zhu Jiu wasn't going to stop. The small boat accelerated through that area. The man's shouts from behind were gradually swallowed by the rain. "Did you see his eyes?" Lin Zhaoyu said. "I saw them. That kind of look." He was evaluating how many supplies they had and how easy they would be to rob. People like that are far more dangerous than outright bandits. By the time the mall came into view, it was already 8:30 in the morning. Zhu Jiu rowed the boat to an entrance on the 3rd floor. It was a side door to the fire escape. A pane of glass was broken, just large enough to climb through. Zhu Jiu vaulted inside, steadied himself, and reached out to pull Lin Zhaoyu in. Fortunately, in these early days of the apocalypse, there were still relatively few people scavenging outside. The mall hadn't been looted yet. The outdoor equipment store was on the east side of the 4th floor. Zhu Jiu pressed his hand against the shutter door, channeling his power. The lock bolt snapped back. The 2 walked in and immediately split up. Sweeping the goods rapidly, they carried the items to the window trip by trip, lowering them into the boat. Zhu Jiu walked to the window and looked down. The small boat was bobbing below. It was already half filled with supplies, but they had only cleared out half of the outdoor equipment store. Stoves, gas canisters, pots, water purifiers, freeze-dried rice, energy bars, sleeping bags, moisture-proof sleeping pads, tools, headlamps. There were just too many useful things left on the shelves. He stopped in his tracks. "What's wrong?" Lin Zhaoyu walked over, carrying a large bag. "The boat can't hold any more." Lin Zhaoyu glanced out the window and also went silent. Indeed, it couldn't hold any more. They had only brought one small boat today. They initially thought it could hold 70-80 of what they'd find, but looking at it now, not even half of this stuff would fit. "Should we make 2 trips?" Lin Zhaoyu asked. Zhu Jiu shook his head. "It's a 1.5-hour trip from here to the apartment building. 2 trips mean 3 hours. Plus the time spent carrying things back and forth. We definitely won't make it back before dark. And it's hard to guarantee no one else will loot this place first." He closed his eyes and rapidly sketched a design in his mind. Then he opened his eyes. "I'll build a bigger one." Zhu Jiu closed his eyes again, channeling his power. A new boat gradually took shape in his consciousness. The boat was 5 meters long, 2.2 meters wide, more than double the size of the original small boat. More than that. A flat bottom, shallow draft, perfect for navigating a flooded city. The hull was divided into 3 sections. The front was the cargo hold, taking up half the length of the boat, with a coverboard to seal it. The middle was the steering area, with a rain canopy and seats. There was storage space beneath the seats. The rear was a small cabin. Its height was 1.6 meters, so one could enter by bending over. It had enough room for one person to lie down and for storing valuable supplies. As for the propulsion system, he pondered for a moment and designed a detachable oar slot at the stern. He also installed a pedal-powered propeller. The hull appeared out of thin air, starting from the bottom and growing upwards layer by layer. All structures were formed simultaneously, as precise and swift as 3D printing. Lin Xiaoyu stood beside him. The backpack in her hand slipped to the ground, her mouth slightly open in awe. 15 minutes later, Su Jiu opened his eyes, his forehead dripping with sweat. His body swayed a bit. Lin Xiaoyu took a big step forward and supported him. Su Jiu leaned against her shoulder, eyes closed, panting for a few breaths. He didn't have a headache. Perhaps it was because his mental limit had increased a bit. But the fatigue still rushed over him overwhelmingly. I'm fine. Let's move the things onto the boat. The two began loading supplies onto the new boat. Everything useful from the outdoor equipment store was loaded in. Yet it only took up half of the cargo hold. Lin Xiaoyu spoke up first. The boat is so big now. Should we grab a bit more? Su Jiu looked at her and nodded. Let's split up. You take the 4th floor. I'll go to the 5th. Got it. Lin Xiaoyu turned and ran towards the stairs. Su Jiu went up to the 5th floor. The 5th floor was a movie theater. Behind the ticket counter, the popcorn machine stood silently. He went around to the back. The snack racks were filled with various snacks. Potato chips, peanuts, chocolates, dried plums, sunflower seeds. Su Jiu swept all of these items into his backpack and duffel bags. The sodas and juices in the beverage fridge were still there. Su Jiu took as many as he possibly could and carried them downstairs trip by trip. Lin Xiaoyu was even crazier than Su Jiu. Although most of the ingredients in the restaurants had already rotted and smelled, anything in sealed packaging was still intact. She moved the goods out trip by trip, stacking them in the 4th floor hallway. When Su Jiu came down from the 5th floor, seeing the mountain of supplies in the hallway, his footsteps paused for a moment. Did you empty out the entire 4th floor? Pretty much. Lin Xiaoyu wiped her sweat. The two started carrying everything downstairs. The new boat's cargo hold was huge, but they had even more stuff. After loading everything, the cargo hold was 90% full. Lin Xiaoyu stood at the bow, looking at the hold full of supplies, and took a deep breath. Su Jiu, with your power, will you be able to build an aircraft carrier later on? You're overthinking it. The new boat slowly departed the mall. The two sat in the steering cabin, pedaling the propeller mechanism. It was much less strenuous than rowing with oars. The rain was still falling, but lighter than it was in the morning. After sailing for 20 minutes, another boat suddenly appeared ahead of them. It was a motorized rubber dinghy. It was moving very fast, shooting out from an intersecting waterway and splashing water a person's height high. There were 4 people sitting in the dinghy. Su Jiu recognized 2 of them. It was the same group that was moving supplies in the supermarket warehouse. The man leading them stood up. Yo! Nice boat you got there. Su Jiu didn't answer. He kept his feet moving on the pedals, maintaining a steady pace forward. The rubber dinghy changed direction and caught up, running parallel to Su Jiu's boat. The distance between the 2 boats was less than 3 meters. We don't mean any harm. The leading man smiled, revealing a mouthful of yellow teeth. Just asking. Do you guys have a lot of supplies? We're almost out of food over here. Could you spare a little? We can trade things for it. No need. Su Jiu said. Don't be so quick to refuse. The man's gaze swept over the cargo hold cover. Look, it's just the 2 of you. With so much stuff. Can you even finish it? We have numbers. Share some and we'll be friends. Lin Xiaoyu's hand had already gripped the folding shovel. I said, no need. Su Jiu's voice turned icy. The young woman on the rubber dinghy suddenly spoke up. Little girl, where did you guys get so much stuff? Su Jiu ignored her. The leading man's smile faded, replaced by a different expression. Little girl, having too much stuff in the apocalypse isn't a good thing. You won't be able to protect it. Why don't you cooperate with us? We'll help you guard it. And you give us a 30% cut. Fair trade. Not fair. Su Jiu stopped pedaling. The boat slowly came to a halt. He stood up, looking straight at the man. Why should I give you 30% of my things? The man narrowed his eyes, his hand reaching towards his waist. Su Jiu didn't step back. He closed his eyes, channeling his power. On the outer hull of the new boat, a layer of metal spikes grew out of nowhere. Like the spines of a hedgehog, they extended from the bow all the way to the stern. The spikes were 30 centimeters long, sharp and pointed, gleaming coldly under the grayish sky. Everyone on the rubber dinghy froze in place. The leading man's hand stopped in mid-air. The expression on his face changed from threatening to shocked, and from shocked to absolute dread. What? What is this? The young woman took a step back in fear, almost slipping and falling into the water. Su Jiu opened his eyes and looked at them. Stay away from me. He pressed the pedals again. The new boat slowly accelerated. The metal spikes were not retracted. The entire boat, like a steel hedgehog, moved forward through the mist. The rubber dinghy remained where it was. No one dared to chase after them. Lin Xiaoyu sat beside him, her knuckles white. Only after the boat had sailed several hundred meters did she finally loosen her grip, letting out a long exhale. By the time they returned to the apartment building, it was already afternoon. The water level had risen a bit more. It was almost flooding the 4th floor. They tied up the new boat and began using a pulley basket to hoist supplies upstairs. When they hoisted the final box of freeze-dried rice into the 6th floor hallway, Su Jiu couldn't hold on any longer. He slid down the wall and sat on the floor. Building that large boat and moving supplies back and forth, the drain on his power and physical stamina had pushed him to the absolute limit. A dull, throbbing pain emanated from his temples, even stronger than when he first built the balcony. Lin Xiaoyu quickly walked over, squatted down, and grabbed his arm. When her fingertips touched Sujiu's skin, she clearly felt him trembling. Half carrying, half supporting him, she helped Sujiu into the living room of 601, letting him lean on the sofa. She then got a dry towel, gently wiping the water droplets off his face and neck. Headache? Lin Zhaoyu looked at Sujiu's tightly closed eyes, his brows knitted in pain, and asked softly. Sujiu nodded slightly, a faint groan escaping his throat. Lin Zhaoyu put down the towel, rolled up her sleeves, rubbed her hands together to warm them, and then gently pressed them against Sujiu's temples. With just the right amount of pressure, she massaged slowly in circular motions. Her technique was very skillful. Her fingertips precisely hit the acupressure points, alternating between light and heavy pressure. The sharp, throbbing pain actually began to ease gradually. Sujiu's tense body slowly relaxed. His brow unfurled a little, and his breathing became steady. While massaging, Lin Zhaoyu said softly, "This power of yours looks impressive. But the cost is also high. You can't push yourself this hard anymore." Sujiu didn't speak. He just kept his eyes closed, letting Lin Zhaoyu massage him. The tension and exhaustion of the past few days quietly slipped away in this moment. Not knowing how much time had passed, he fell into a deep sleep. Lin Zhaoyu stopped her movements, looked at Sujiu's sleeping face, gently stood up, and covered him with a thin blanket. Sujiu rested for the night. Having recovered his energy, he started working early the next morning. Sujiu closed his eyes, channeling the power in his mind. His consciousness clearly saw the structure of the entire building. From the load-bearing walls on the ground floor to the 6th floor slab, every single rebar, every detail of the concrete was vivid in his mind. First, he focused his intent to reinforce the floor slabs and load-bearing walls, making them capable of supporting additional weight above. Then he began building upwards. Lin Zhaoyu stood to the side, while organizing supplies. She occasionally looked up at Sujiu, her eyes full of amazement. For an entire day, Sujiu was entirely focused on constructing the house. At noon, Lin Zhaoyu brought him cooked instant noodles and hot soup, making him stop to rest for a moment. By dusk, the 7th and 8th floors were finally completed. Even the terrace's rain canopy and water storage system were built as well. Sujiu opened his eyes, though exhausted, looking at the 2 brand new floors in front of him. A sense of accomplishment washed over him. The 2 newly built floors were even more comfortable than expected. The 7th floor living room was spacious and bright. A massive floor-to-ceiling window was installed on the sunny side. Even though it was raining outside, a glimmer of light could still be seen through the clouds. The bedroom was paved with smooth floors created by his power. The walls were damp-proofed, and a small walk-in closet was sectioned off. The kitchen was next to the living room. The countertop was crafted from a solid block of marble, and built-in storage cabinets were added beside it for storing cookware and ingredients. The 8th floor terrace was spacious and flat. The rain canopy was arched. Rainwater would flow down the gutters into the storage tank below. Next to the water tank, Sujiu had also built a filtration system. After filtration, the rainwater could be used for washing up and cooking. In a corner of the terrace, Lin Zhaoyu had already mapped out a small vegetable patch. She planned to grow some bean sprouts, bok choy, and other fast-growing vegetables. Over the next few days, they had a clear division of labor. Su Jiu was responsible for improving and reinforcing the house. He used his power to build tiered shelves in the storage room, moisture-proof drawers, and crafted a stove and cabinets in the kitchen. He even went as far as building a small dock outside the 6th-floor hallway to easily dock the small boat. Right next to the dock, he built a supply hoisting mechanism. Moving supplies in the future wouldn't require strenuous manual lifting anymore. It would save time and effort. Lin Xiaoyu was in charge of managing the supplies and daily life chores. She sorted and organized all the supplies, arranging them neatly on the storage room shelves. Every morning, she would make breakfast using filtered rainwater. For lunch and dinner, she mixed up the ingredients in different ways, trying to keep their meals as nutritious as possible. They still set out at every day to search for supplies, but their routes became more planned out. They were no longer searching blindly. They focused on locations with higher elevation that were not easily discovered by others. Su Jiu's power was getting stronger and stronger. Not only could he rapidly build and reinforce, he could also precisely extract raw materials from underground. He could even create small tools and equipment, such as nets for salvaging items from the water, metal knives for cutting things, and airtight jars for storing food. Once, in a suburban farmhouse warehouse, on high ground, they found a batch of unopened seeds and fertilizer, along with a few bags of rice and flour. Su Jiu immediately used his power to craft several large airtight grain bins. They properly stored the rice, flour, and seeds inside. They then cultivated the vegetable patch on the 8th-floor terrace and applied the fertilizer to make the vegetables grow faster and better. Lin Xiaoyu took charge of tending the garden, watering them every day, fertilizing and weeding, watching the seeds slowly sprout and grow. Her heart was filled with hope. They also managed to collect several barrels of gasoline and a small generator. Su Jiu then built a small power supply system, wiring the generator to every corner of the house. From then on, they had electric lights in their home. They could cook using electricity and could even recharge their headlamps and flashlights. Life became more and more convenient. One day, when the two returned from a supply run, they found the water level had risen again. It had already submerged the roof of the 5th floor. Most of the surrounding residential buildings were entirely submerged, leaving only the tips of a few high rises exposed. In the days that followed, they continued living their steady, routine lives, going out to search for supplies every day, coming back to improve the house, tending to the vegetable patch. Occasionally, they would encounter other survivors. Some were friendly, some were greedy, but relying on Su Jiu's power, they safely overcame every danger. Su Jiu also utilized his power to create more convenient amenities: an auto-filtering water storage system, a temperature-controlled storage room, and a small greenhouse for cultivating delicate vegetables and seeds. Lin Xiaoyu managed the supplies in perfect order. Every single item was put to its best use, never letting anything go to waste. She also used her nursing knowledge to occasionally help out friendly survivors, trading for some supplies that they needed. Su Jiu stood on the 10th-floor terrace, looking out at the distant floods. He knew very well in his heart that the apocalypse was far from over. He would continue making this building grow upwards and continue managing their little haven well until the end of the apocalypse, until the day they could once again see the sunlight completely bathing the earth. The end.